Pórtate bien, Ezequiel. Behave, Ezekiel. That's what my grandmother used to tell me. I never realized why. We're always joking. Nunca me di cuenta por qué. Siempre mi abuelita era bromera, ¿verdad? Siempre andábamos jugando y todo, pero nunca sabe por qué me decía eso. Pero muy reciente me di cuenta de algo. I never knew why my grandmother would tell me that, but recently I realized what a small world it is. Actually, it reinforced it today with somebody I ran into right before service. And it opened my eyes because that was what my lesson was going to be about today. Loving one another and the new commandment that Jesus had given us to love one another. And sometimes we forget that, that is the new commandment that's given to us in John 13. Nunca me di cuenta, pero a veces nosotros nos olvidamos que eso es una de los commandments. I'm sorry, what in Spanish? Mandamientos. En Juan 13 nos dice que ese es uno de el nuevo mandamiento. Many years ago, and I'm talking about maybe almost 20 years ago, at work, I used to work here in Westlaco at a little store down here off the expressway, and I would have a regular customer. I would go, he'd call me up and say, hey, I need some help, come and get me, I was like, all right. So I'd go get him, bring him to my store, help him, and we'd go on our way. And I would talk with him, very frequently. He'd come by, visit and stuff. Hace casi 20 años conocí un señor en el trabajo y siempre me hablaba, siempre visitaba conmigo ahí en la tienda. Y no pensé nada, pero siempre me encantaba hablar con él porque siempre tenía cuentos para nosotros ahí en la oficina. This gentleman always had stories for us there, at work. He'd always come in, and talk and everything and tell us stories. And it was great having him visit with us. So fast forward maybe 15 years, 10 years. Finally, BC got us to come to church. And that gentleman that I was referring to was Travis. Many years later, Travis, everybody knows, sometimes he sits in back, sometimes he sits in front, just depending, how he feels that day. But I never realized back then how treating somebody always reminded me now on what my grandmother used to tell me, behave. Nunca se me olvidó o nunca me di cuenta que me recordaba de mi abuelita cuando me decía, Ezequiel, pórtate bien, ¿verdad? Hasta ese momento, up until that point, I realized, and it hit me, and it goes back to loving one another, treating everybody, with respect, just like the new commandment says in John 13, 34 through 35. So that was interesting to me. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm a sinner. And in the Bible, we're reminded by that let me get my notes right here and put on my trusty readers. In Romanos 3:23, Romanos 3:23, it tells us, for we all have sinned and fall short from the glory of God. So I'm not perfect. Sometimes, I'll be the first to admit, I bite my lip, something happens, somebody does something, and I want to get mad. Um, en Romanos 3:23, let me get to that here. And I'm going to translate here. Pues todos han pecado y están privados de la gloria de Dios. So, como dije, somos pecadores, yo soy pecador y a veces cuando algo pasa, algo me hace un mal y me muerdo el labio para no decir nada. Me enojo, pero nunca digo nada. Tengo mucha paciencia. I have a lot of patience, so I don't do that. I don't lose my patience or lose, quote unquote, my cool, so to speak. But, once again, I always remind myself of what my grandmother used to tell me. Years ago, probably 20, 30 years as well, in my travels to San Antonio during school, college, weekends for friends, we'd go to San Antonio. With my family, we'd go to San Antonio. On the way back, we'd stop in this little town. Everybody knows that little town. It's midway between here and San Antonio and George West. Everybody knows George West. And I'm sure everybody stopped at the ice box. It's closed now. Now everybody knows the ice box. You're driving back from San Antonio. It's on your right-hand side, probably in the middle of town of George West. Hace muchos años, 30 años, hay un pueblito entre aquí y San Antonio, George West. En George West hay una tiendita, se llama la Icebox. Regresando de San Antonio está a la mano derecha. Ya cerró hace unos años, pero cuando hablé con Bici un día, o varias veces, ¿verdad? Él me decía, yo trabajaba en esa tiendita y me di cuenta de unas cosas, ¿verdad? BC, in our conversations, would always tell me, I used to work there at the Icebox. I was like, wow. I thought to myself, all this time, 30 years, I'd be going by there, visiting, stopping there, pit stop for whatever we did. Hace años, como dije, parábamos ahí. And one thing I would notice was people were always upset, some of them going in there. They'd throw chips, they'd throw Cokes, they'd probably get mad because they didn't have any money and they'd walk out. Siempre noté cuando entraba a esa tiendita, a veces cuando había gente que estaba enojada. Se enojaban porque no tenían suficiente dinero para pagar una soda, tiraban comida ahí donde pagan, se iban, gritaban a la gente que trabajaba allí. And I don't remember ever being mean to anybody there. I hope not. If not, BC would have probably remembered. Nunca me enojaba con nadie. A lo mejor era porque como me creían mis familias, ¿verdad? Maybe because the way I was raised. I treated everybody with respect and love. Now, going back, of course, yes, we're all sinners and sometimes I do forget to bite my lip, but nobody's perfect. In Ephesians 4:32 and Efesios 4:32, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ God has forgiven you. En Efesios 4:32, otra vez mis notas. ¿Alguien ya está ahí en Efesios? ¿Puede leer, por favor, mientras lo encuentro? Gracias. Many years ago, once again, probably about 20 years ago, I'm getting closer now. I met this gentleman. Hace unos años, casi 20 años. Ya estoy regresando más a estos tiempos, ¿verdad? Conocí un señor en el trabajo. I met this gentleman at work. So we started talking where he was from. He was from a little town outside of Monterrey called Santiago, Nuevo León. Este señor, un compañero de trabajo, he was actually a coworker. He was from a little town outside of Monterrey, Santiago, Nuevo León. And I was all like, wow. I go, I have family there. Le dije, yo tengo familia allí. And I started naming some of my family members. And he goes, I was just there with him 2 days ago having dinner. This is a gentleman I had never met before. We've worked together. And he knows my family members, my cousins, my aunts. Este señor, platicamos y me dijo, yo le dije, yo tengo familia en esta ciudad, en Santiago. Ya van años que no he visitado. It's been years that I had visited. Le dije los nombres de mis primos, de mis tías. And he goes, y me dice, wow, comí cena con ellos hace 2 noches. Este señor no lo conocía, nomás por trabajo, y me dijo eso. So I realized once again what a small world it was. And once again, I never did any wrong to this gentleman. You know, we talked. I was always real nice to him. Siempre me sacó de sorpresa que él sí conoció a mi familia. Nunca le traté mal al Señor. Siempre me decía, usted es una buena persona. He would always tell me, you're a good person. Your family says you're a good person. Él me decía que mi familia le dice que es muy buena persona. So it felt good that my family remembered me since I hadn't seen them in almost 20, 30 years. Me sentí bien que mi familia decía eso, que nunca, y ya van casi 20, 30 años que no los miro. Y ellos le están diciendo eso a él. So it's interesting that here's different things in my life, different episodes, so to speak. Es interesante que varios años pasaron, ¿verdad? Y hay muchos ejemplos en mi vida que por una razón o algo conozco a alguien que conoce a mi familia. He conocido en unos viajes that I've met somebody, that knows my family when you least expect it. In my travels, my coworkers, things like that. And it's interesting how sometimes we take for granted how we treat each other. Sometimes I'll be the first one to admit, we hear gossip, we hear so-and-so, and it makes you wonder. A veces oigo, y todos hemos oído a alguien platicando de alguien, diciendo cosas, y me pongo a pensar, and I start to think, and Kelly reminded me about this, on having to account for yourself. Kelly me acordó de unos versos en la Biblia de cuando, I don't know how to say account in Spanish, cuando das cuenta a alguien, ¿verdad? I'm assuming I'm saying that right. A lo mejor lo estoy diciendo mal. But we're going to have an account of ourselves when we leave this earth. And it makes me wonder, are we ready for that? Or am I ready for that? And bless you. And once again, I was raised, to be good. And it is difficult. But we always have to remember, even Jesus, reminded us and told us, just as, when he had dinner with Matthew, the tax collector, you know, he reminded them, you know, number one, be good, and number two, you know, he's here to save everybody, not just the good, but especially the bad. O Jesús nos da el ejemplo que, por ejemplo, cuando él está con Mateo cenando y los sacerdotes le dicen, ¿por qué estás comiendo con pecadores? Y él les dice, porque yo vengo aquí a salvarlos también, no nomás a los buenos. So it's kind of a reminder. You never know who you're going to cross paths with, and we should all learn to start being kind and loving one another, because you never really know who you're going to cross paths with in the future when you least expect it. And I certainly did not expect all those examples 20, 30 years later to still meet those people, to know those people, to come across those people. Nunca en mi vida imaginé que después de 20 años, 30 años, iba a toparme con gente que conocía a mi familia, que tal vez en los viajes conocía a alguien y se me olvidó o no les di atención o algo. Ya después de 20 años vienen y me dicen, te conozco, hemos conocido a tu familia o algo. So, just as a reminder, always love one another, always be kind to each other, because you really never know who you're going to cross paths with. That's my lesson for tonight. I hope it's eye-opening. Thank you. Esa es la lección mía. Ojalá que aprendieron algo, que sean humildes con todos, que amen a todos, y con eso acabo. Gracias. Thank you.